Hello, and welcome to the stream. We are continuing our reading of Pride and Prejudice tonight, and I hope that you all are having a wonderful Tuesday evening, or Wednesday morning, or whatever time it is where you are. I hope that you're having a wonderful week, start of your week, and I hope that you're staying cool out there. It's pretty hot. It's pretty hot where I am, so I hope it cools down some in the next couple days, because it's hot. But yeah, I am going to, I guess, I don't think there's anything that's too pressing that I need to get out of the way before we start reading. So yeah, I guess we'll just start reading. Let me see. Where were we? Oh, yes. Volume 2, Chapter 6. Mr. Collins's triumph in consequence of this invitation was complete. The power of displaying the grandeur of his patroness to his wondering visitors, and of letting them see her civility towards himself and his wife, was exactly what he had wished for, and that an opportunity of doing it should be given so soon was such an instance of Lady Catherine's condescension as he knew not how to admire enough. "I confess," said he, "that I should not have been at all surprised by her ladyship's asking us on Sunday to drink tea and spend the evening at Rosings. I rather expected, from my knowledge of her affability, that it would happen, but who could have foreseen such an attention as this? Who could have imagined that we should receive an invitation to dine there, an invitation, moreover, including the whole party, so immediately after your arrival?" Sorry, there's a plane flying above my place. Plane ASMR, guys. Plane ASMR. Hopefully it's not too bad. "I am less surprised at what has happened, sir," replied Sir William, from that knowledge of what the manners of the great really are, which my situation in life has allowed me to acquire. About the court, such instances of elegant breeding are not uncommon. Scarcely anything was talked of the whole day or next morning but their visit to Rosings. Mr. Collins was carefully instructing them in what they were to expect, that the sight of such rooms, so many servants, and so splendid a dinner might not wholly overpower them. When the ladies were separating for the toilet, he said to Elizabeth, "Do not make yourself uneasy, my dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine is far from requiring that elegance of dress in us, which becomes herself and daughter. I would advise you merely put on whatever of your clothes is superior to the rest. There is no occasion for anything more. Lady Catherine will not think the worse of you for being simply dressed. She likes to have the distinction of rank preserved." Basically, try and pick the least offensive outfit you have, and that'll do. Thanks, Mr. Collins. Thank you. While they were dressing, He came 2 or 3 times to the different doors to recommend their being quick, as Lady Catherine very much objected to to be kept waiting for her dinner. Such formidable accounts of her ladyship and her manner of living quite frightened Maria Lucas, who had been a little used to company, and she looked forward to her introduction at Rosings. With such apprehension as her father had done to his presentation at James's. As the weather was fine, they had a pleasant walk of about a half-mile across the park. Every park has its beauty and its prospects, and Elizabeth saw much to be pleased with, though she could not be in such raptures as Mr. Collins expected the scene to inspire, and was but slightly affected by his enumeration. His enumeration of the windows in front of the house, and his relation of what the glazing altogether had originally cost Sir Louis de Bourgh. No. My model went crazy for a second. Hi, Lexi. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. I'm good. I'm just hanging out, reading some Pride and Prejudice. Hi, Lemus. How's it going? When they ascended the steps to the hall, Maria's alarm was every moment increasing, and even Sir William did not look perfectly calm. Elizabeth's courage did not fail her. She had heard nothing of Lady Catherine that spoke her awful from any extraordinary talents or miraculous virtue, and the mere stateliness of money and rank she thought she could witness without trepidation. That's good. I'm glad. Yes, definitely time to unwind. Time to unwind after a hard, long day. From the entrance hall of which Mr. Collins pointed out, with a rapturous air, the fine proportion and finished ornaments, they followed the servants through an antechamber to the room where Lady Catherine, her daughter, and Mrs. Jenkinson were sitting. Her ladyship, with great condescension, arose to receive them, and as Mrs. Collins had settled it with her husband that the office of introduction should be hers, it was performed in a proper manner, without any of those apologies and thanks which he would have thought necessary. In spite of having been at St. James's, Sir William was so completely awed by the grandeur surrounding him that he had but just courage enough to make a very low bow and take his seat without saying a word, and his daughter, frightened almost out of her senses, sat on the edge of her chair, not knowing which way to look. Elizabeth found herself quite equal to the scene, and could observe the three ladies before her composedly. Lady Catherine was a tall, large woman with strongly marked features, which might once have been handsome. Her air was not conciliating, nor was her manner of receiving them such as to make her visitors forget their inferior rank. She was not rendered formidable by silence, but whatever she said was spoken in so authoritative a tone as marked her self-importance, and brought Mr. Wickham immediately to Elizabeth's mind. Ooh, Mr. Wickham. And from the observation of the day altogether, she believed Lady Catherine to be exactly what he had represented. When, after examining the mother, in whose countenance and deportment she soon found some resemblance of Mr. Darcy, she turned her eyes on the daughter. She could almost have joined in Maria's astonishment at her being so thin and so small. There was neither in figure nor face any likeness between the ladies. Miss de Bourgh was pale and sickly. Her features, though not plain, were insignificant, and she spoke very little except in a low tone to Mrs. Jenkinson, in whose appearance there was nothing remarkable, and who was entirely engaged in listening to what she said, and placing a screen in the proper direction before her eyes. Hold on just a second. Okay. After sitting a few minutes, they were all sent to one of the windows to admire the view, Mr. Collins attending them to point out its beauties, and Lady Catherine kindly informing them it was much better worth looking at in the summer. The dinner was exceedingly handsome, and there were all the servants and all the articles of plate which Mr. Collins had promised. And as he had likewise foretold, he took his seat at the bottom of the table by her ladyship's desire, and looked as if he felt that life could furnish nothing greater. He carved and ate, and praised with delighted alacrity, and every dish was commended first by him and then by Sir William, who was now enough recovered to echo whatever his son-in-law said, in a manner which Elizabeth wondered. Lady Catherine could bear. But Lady Catherine seemed gratified by their excessive admiration, and gave most gracious smiles, especially when any dish on the table proved a novelty to them. The party did not supply much conversation. Elizabeth was ready to speak whenever there was an opening, but she was seated between Charlotte and Miss de Bourgh, the former of whom was engaged in listening to Lady Catherine, and the latter said not a word to her all dinner time. Mrs. Jenkinson was chiefly employed in watching how little Miss de Bourgh ate, pressing her to try some other dish, and fearing she were indisposed. Maria thought speaking out of the question, and the gentlemen did nothing but eat and admire. When the ladies returned to the drawing-room, there was little to be done but to hear Lady Catherine talk, which she did without any intermission till coffee came in, delivering her opinion on every subject in so decisive a manner as proved that she was not used to having her judgment controverted. She inquired into Charlotte's domestic concerns familiarly and minutely, and gave her a great deal of advice as to the management of them all. Told her how everything ought to be regulated in so small a family as hers, and instructed her as to the care of her cows and her poultry. Elizabeth found that nothing was beneath this great lady's attention which could furnish her with an occasion of dictating to others. In the intervals of her discourse with Mrs. Collins, she addressed a variety of questions to Maria and Elizabeth, but especially to the latter, of whose connections she knew the least, and who, she observed to Mrs. Collins, was a very genteel, pretty kind of girl. She asked her at different times how many sisters she had, whether they were older or younger than herself, whether any of them were likely to be married, whether they were handsome, where they had been educated, what carriage her father kept, and what had been her mother's maiden name. Elizabeth felt all the impertinence of her questions, but answered them very composedly. Lady Catherine then observed, "Your father's estate is entailed to Mr. Collins, I think. For your sake," turning to Charlotte, "I am glad of it, but otherwise I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. It was not thought necessary in Sir Louis de Bourgh's family. Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?" "A little." "Oh, then sometime or other we shall be happy to hear you. Our instrument is a capital one, properly superior to... Oh, you shall have to try it. You shall try it some day. Do your sisters play and sing? One of them does. Why did you not all learn?" "You ought all to have learned. The Miss Webbs all play, and their father has not so good an income as yours. Do you draw?" "No, not at all." "What, none of you?" "Not one." "That is very strange, but I suppose you had no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you to town every spring for the benefit of masters." "My mother would have had no objection, but my father hates London." "Has your governess left you?" "We never had any governess." "No governess? How was that possible? 5 daughters brought up at a home without a governess? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education." Elizabeth could hardly help smiling as she assured her that that had not been the case. "Then who taught you? Who attended to you? Without a governess, you must have been neglected." "Compared with some families, I believe we were, but such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. We were always encouraged to read, and had all the masters that were necessary. Those who chose to be idle certainly might." "Aye, no doubt. But that is what a governess will prevent. And if I had known your mother, I should have advised her most strenuously to engage one. I always say that nothing is to be done in education without steady and regular instruction, and nobody but a governess can give it. It is wonderful how many families I have been the means of supplying in that way. I am always glad to get a young person well placed out. 4 nieces of Mrs. Jenkinson are most delightfully situated through my means, and it was but the other day that I recommended another young person, who was merely accidentally mentioned to me, and the family are quite delighted with her. Mrs. Collins, did I tell you of Lady Metcalfe's calling yesterday to thank me? She finds Miss Pope a treasure. 'Lady Catherine,' she said, 'you have given me a treasure.' Are any of your young sisters out, Miss Bennet?" "Yes, ma'am, all." "All? What, all 5 at once? Very odd. And you, only the second? The younger ones out before the elder are married?" "Your younger sisters must be very young." "Yes, my youngest is not 16, but perhaps she is full young to be much in company. But really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share of society and amusement because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early." The last-born has as good a right to the pleasures of youth as the first. And to be kept back on such a motive, I think it would not be very likely to promote sisterly affection or delicacy of mind. Upon my word, said her ladyship, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age? With 3 younger sisters grown up, replied Elizabeth, smiling, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it. Lady Catherine seemed quite astonished at not receiving a direct answer, and Elizabeth suspected herself to be the first creature who had ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. You cannot be more than 20, I am sure. Therefore, you need not conceal your age. I am not 21. When the gentlemen had joined them, and tea was over, the card tables were placed. Lady Catherine, Sir William, and Mr. and Mrs. Collins sat down to quadrille, and as Mr. Borg chose to play at casino, the 2 girls had the honor of assisting Mrs. Jenkinson to make up her party. Their table was superlatively stupid. Scarcely a syllable was uttered that did not relate to the game, except when Mrs. Jenkinson expressed her fears of Mr. Borg's being too hot or too cold, or having too much or too little light. A great deal more passed at the other table. Lady Catherine was, generally speaking, stating the mistakes of the other 3, or relating some anecdote of herself. Mr. Collins was employed in agreeing to everything her ladyship said, thanking her for every fish he won, and apologizing if he thought he won too many. Sir William did not say much. He was storing his memory with anecdotes and noble names. When Lady Catherine and her daughter had played as long as they chose, the tables were broken up. The carriage was offered to Mrs. Collins, gratefully accepted, and immediately ordered. The party then gathered round the fire to hear Lady Catherine determine what weather they were to have on the morrow. From these instructions they were summoned by the arrival of the coach, and with many speeches of thankfulness on Mr. Collins's side, and as many bows on Sir William's, they departed. As soon as they had driven from the door, Elizabeth was called on by her cousin to give her opinion of all that she had seen at Rosings, which, for Charlotte's sake, she made more favorable than it really was. But her commendation, though costing her some trouble, could by no means satisfy Mr. Collins, and he was very soon obliged to take her ladyship's praise into his own hands. Mr. Collins, you are so self-absorbed and obsessed with Lady Catherine. Chapter 7. Sir William stayed only a week at Hunsford, but his visit was long enough to convince him of his daughters being most comfortably settled, and of her possessing such a husband and such a neighbor as were not often met with. While Sir William was with them, Mr. Collins devoted his mornings to driving him out in his gig, and showing him the country. But when he went away, the whole family returned to their usual employments, and Elizabeth was thankful to find that they did not see more of her cousin by the alteration. For the chief of the time between breakfast and dinner was now passed by him either at work in the garden or in reading or in reading and writing, and looking out of the window in his own book room, which fronted the road. The room in which the ladies sat was backwards. Elizabeth at first had rather wondered that Charlotte should not prefer the dining parlor for common use. It was a better-sized room, and had a pleasanter aspect, but she soon saw that her friend had an excellent reason for what she did, for Mr. Collins would undoubtedly have been much less in his own apartment had they sat in one equally lively, and she gave Charlotte credit for the arrangement. Charlotte's very clever. From the drawing room they could distinguish nothing in the lane, and were indebted to Mr. Collins for the knowledge of what carriages went along, and how often, especially Miss de Bourgh, drove by in her phaeton, which he never failed coming to inform them of, though it happened almost every day. She not unfrequently stopped at the parsonage, and had a few minutes' conversation with Charlotte, but was scarcely ever prevailed on to get out. I think, so Mr. Collins is essentially a priest, right? So what does he do? What does he do all day that as a priest? Well, all he does is lavish praises on his lady patron, and that's it. He doesn't seem to do anything related to being a priest at all. It's just funny. Hold on just a second. Okay. He's just a very yeah. He does none of his duties except sermons, and his sermons are all about Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I'm pretty sure that he worships her more than God. Very few days passed in which Mr. Collins did not walk to Rosings. Not many in which his wife did not think it necessary to go likewise, until Elizabeth recollected that there might be other family livings to be disposed of. She could not understand the sacrifice of so many hours. Now and then they were honored with a call from her ladyship, and nothing escaped her observation that was passing in the room during these visits. She examined into their employments, looked at their work, and advised them to do it differently, found fault with the arrangement of the furniture, or detected the housemaid in negligence, and if she accepted any refreshment, seemed to do it only for the sake of finding out that Mrs. Collins's joints of meat were too large for her family. Wow. What a pleasant lady. Elizabeth soon perceived that though this great lady was not in the commission of the peace for the country, she was a most active magistrate in her own parish. The minutest concerns of which were carried to her by Mr. Collins, and whenever any of the cottagers were disposed to be quarrelsome, discontented, or too poor, she sallied forth into the village to settle their differences, silence their complaints, and scold them into harmony and plenty. The entertainment of dining at Rosings was repeated about twice a week, and allowing for the loss of Sir William, and there being only one card table in the evening, Every such entertainment was the counterpart of the first. Their other engagements were few, as the style of living of the neighborhood in general was beyond the Collinses' reach. This, however, was no evil to Elizabeth, and upon the whole she spent her time comfortably enough. There were half hours of pleasant conversation with Charlotte, and the weather was so fine for the time of year that she had often great enjoyment of outdoors. Her favorite walk, and where she frequently went while the others were calling on Lady Catherine, was along the open grove which edged that side of the park, where there was a nice sheltered path which no one seemed to value but herself, and where she felt beyond the reach of Lady Catherine's curiosity. In this quiet way, the first fortnight of her visit soon passed away. Easter was approaching, and the week preceding it was to bring an addition to the family at Rosings, which in so small a circle must be important. Elizabeth had soon heard, after her arrival, that Mr. Darcy was expected there in the course of a few weeks, and though there were not many of her acquaintance whom she did not prefer, his coming would furnish one comparatively new to look at in their Rosings parties, and she might be amused in seeing how hopeless Miss Bingley's designs on him were, by his behavior to his cousin, for whom he was evidently destined by Lady Catherine, who talked of his coming with the greatest satisfaction, spoke of him in terms of the highest admiration, and seemed almost angry to find that he had already been frequently seen by Miss Lucas and herself. His arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking the whole morning within view of the lodges opening into Hunsford Lane. "Oh, thank you for the raid, Matsu. Thank you so much. Welcome, raiders. I hope you had a wonderful stream. What were you reading something? What were you doing? Let me... Hold on. Oh, King's Quest 2. Nice. I haven't played that. What's it about? It sounds like it might be up my alley. Well, welcome, raiders. I am Emrys, the Fey Librarian VTuber, and I like to read public domain books and poetry to my chat, and also just like generally play video games terribly, mostly RPGs, but a variety of games. It's a DOS game where Oh, cool. That's really cool. I'll have to look that up after my stream. Well, yeah, I thank you again for the raid, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful evening. I forgot to mention that tonight we are continuing our reading of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful time and stick around for the reading. Darcy's arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking the whole morning within view of the lodges opening of the lodge's opening into Hunsford Lane, in order to have the earliest assurance of it, and after making his bow as the carriage turned into the park, hurried home with the great intelligence. On the following morning he hastened to Rosings to pay his respects. There were 2 nephews of Lady Catherine to require them, for Mr. Darcy had brought with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the younger son of his uncle, Lord... It does that kind of like long dash thing that more classical texts do. I'm just gonna say Colonel Lord Fitzwilliam. And to the great surprise of all the party, when Mr. Collins returned, the gentleman accompanied him. Charlotte had seen them from her husband's room, crossing the road, and immediately running into the other, told the girls what an honor they might expect, adding, "I may thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. Mr. Darcy would never have come so soon to wait upon me." Elizabeth had scarcely time to disclaim all right to the compliment before their approach was announced by the doorbell, and shortly afterwards the 3 gentlemen entered the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam, who led the way, was about 30, not handsome, but in person and address most truly the gentleman. Mr. Darcy looked just as he had been used to look in Hertfordshire, paid his compliments with his usual reserve to Mrs. Collins, and whatever might be his feelings toward her friend, met her with every appearance of composure. Elizabeth merely curtsied to him, without saying a word. Colonel Fitzwilliam entered into conversation directly, with the readiness and ease of a well-bred man, and talked very pleasantly, but his cousin, after having addressed a slight observation on the house and garden to Mrs. Collins, sat for some time without speaking to anybody. "Oh, Darcy, you're so socially awkward and filled with social anxiety, and I love you." At length, however, his civility was so far awakened as to inquire of Elizabeth after the health of her family. She answered him in the usual way, and after a moment's pause added, "My eldest sister has been in town these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there?" She was perfectly sensible that he never had, but she wished to see whether he would betray any consciousness of what had passed between the Bingleys and Jane, and she thought he looked a little confused as he answered that he had never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet. The subject was pursued no further, and the gentleman soon afterwards went away. Hello, Emrys. Hello, Emrys, rhymes with abyss. Welcome to the stream. How are you doing? We are just having some awkward moments with Darcy and Miss Elizabeth Bennet, and how Mr. Darcy is not taking responsibility for breaking up Bingley and Jane, and also being very socially awkward, as he is wont to do. Chapter 8. Colonel Fitzwilliam's manners were very much admired at the parsonage, and the ladies all felt that he must add considerably to the pleasure of their engagements at Rosings. It was some days, however, before they received any invitation thither, for while there were visitors in the house, they could not be necessary, and it was not till Easter Day, almost a week after the gentleman's arrival, that they were honored by such an attention. And then they were merely asked, on leaving church, to come there in the evening. For the last week they had seen very little of either Lady Catherine or her daughter. Colonel Fitzwilliam had called at the parsonage more than once during this time, but Mr. Darcy they had only seen at church. Oh, well, I thank you. I thank you very much for stopping by and lurking a bit. Very much appreciate that. The invitation was accepted, of course, and at a proper hour they joined the party in Lady Catherine's drawing-room. Her ladyship received them civilly, but it was plain that their company was by no means so acceptable as when she could get nobody else, and she was, in fact, almost engrossed by her nephews, speaking to them, especially to Darcy, much more than any other person in the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam seemed really glad to see them. Anything was a welcome relief to him at Rosings, and Mrs. Collins's pretty friend had moreover caught his fancy very much. He now seated himself by her, and talked so agreeably of Kent and Hertfordshire, of travelling and staying at home, of new books and music, that Elizabeth had never been half so well entertained in that room before. And they conversed with so much spirit and flow as to draw the attention of Lady Catherine herself, as well as of Mr. Darcy. His eyes had been soon and repeatedly turned towards them with a look of curiosity, and that her ladyship, after a while, shared the feeling, was more openly acknowledged, for she did not scruple to call out, "What is that you are saying, Fitzwilliam? What is it you are talking of? What are you telling Miss Bennet? Let me hear what it is." "Oh, thank you, Zella, for the hydrate regime. I will take that." Well, my dear Darcy, is that jealousy? Is that jealousy that I see or that I sense? Another man talking to Elizabeth Bennet and having a good time doing so. Jealousy is an ugly emotion, Mr. Darcy. "We are speaking of music, madam," said he, when no longer able to avoid a reply. "Of music? Then pray speak aloud. It is of all subjects my delight. I must have my share in the conversation if you are speaking of music. There are few people in England, I suppose, who have a more true enjoyment of music than myself, or a better natural taste. If I had ever learnt, I should have been a great proficient. And so would Anne, if her health had allowed her to apply. I am confident that she would have performed delightfully. How does Georgiana get on, Darcy?" Mr. Darcy spoke with affectionate praise to his sister's proficiency. "I am very glad to hear such a good account of her," said Lady Catherine, "and pray tell her for me that she cannot expect to excel if she does not practice a great deal." "I assure you, madam," he replied, "that she does not need such advice. She practices very constantly." "So much the better. It cannot be done too much, and when I next write to her, I shall charge her not to neglect it on any account. I often tell young ladies that no excellence in music is to be acquired without constant practice. I have told Miss Bennet several times that she will never play really well unless she practices more. And though Mrs. Collins has no instrument, she is very welcome, as I have often told her, to come to Rosings every day and play on the pianoforte in Mrs. Jenkinson's room. She would be in nobody's way, you know, in that part of the house." Mr. Darcy looked a little ashamed of his aunt's ill-breeding and made no answer. Even Darcy knows that she's a little bit of a buffoon, which is funny because Darcy is a bit of a buffoon. Okay, chat. I have an important question. Who is more of a buffoon? Mr. Collins or Lady Catherine de Bourgh? Maybe we should do a poll. I can't decide myself. Honestly, I think it's a toss-up for me. I don't know. I truly don't know. They're both so... They're both so crazy. When coffee was over, Colonel Fitzwilliam reminded Elizabeth of having promised to play to him, and she sat down directly to the instrument. In fact, he drew a chair near her. Lady Catherine listened to a half-song, and then talked, as before, to her other nephew, till the latter walked away from her, and, moving with his usual deliberation towards the pianoforte, stationed himself as to command a full view of the fair performer's countenance. Elizabeth saw what he was doing, and at the first convenient pause, turned to him with an arch smile, and said, Yeah, I can definitely see that. Lady Catherine is pompous in a way that is so like self-indulgent that it's hard not to say it's her. Because yeah, like you said, at least Mr. Collins is just trying to like kiss his boss's ass. So like he can at least be forgiven because he's poor and needs this job. And if he doesn't brown nose to her and say, you know, how great she is every 5 seconds, then she'll just fire him and find somebody else who will. So yeah, I agree. Probably Lady Catherine, because she doesn't have to be doing this, but Mr. Collins kind of does. So yeah, I agree, Lemus. I think you're right. And it's just so funny, like how I think Jane Austen does a really great job of of describing a lot of people who are in positions of power, who, like, whether it's a, you know, whoever, like, whether it's a principal of a school or a manager at a company or whatever, there are a lot of people like Lady Catherine. And there are also a lot of people like Collins. And it's just, it's amazing to me how well she portrays that kind of self-indulgent idiocy. If that makes sense. You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy, by coming in all this state to hear me. But I will not be alarmed, though your sister does play so well. There is a stubbornness about me that never can bear to be frightened at the will of others. My courage always rises with every attempt to intimidate me. I shall not say that you are mistaken, he replied, because you could not really believe me to entertain any design of alarming you. And I have had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know that you find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions which, in fact, are not your own. Elizabeth laughed heartily at this picture of herself, and said to Colonel Fitzwilliam, "Your cousin will give you a very pretty notion of me, and teach you not to believe a word I say. I am particularly unlucky in meeting with a person so well able to expose my real character in a part of the world where I had hoped to pass myself off with some degree of credit. Indeed, Mr. Darcy, it is very ungenerous in you to mention all that you knew to my disadvantage in Hertfordshire, and give me leave to say very impolitic too, for it is provoking me to retaliate, and such things may come out as will shock your relations to hear. I am not afraid of you," said he, smiling. "Oh, Darcy, but you should be. You absolutely should be." "Pray, let me hear what you have to accuse him of," cried Colonel Fitzwilliam. "I should like to know how he behaves amongst strangers." "You shall hear then, but prepare yourself for something very dreadful. The first time of my ever seeing him in Hertfordshire, you must know, was at a ball, and at this ball, what do you think he did? He danced only 4 dances. I am sorry to pain you, but so it was. He danced only 4 dances, though gentlemen were scarce. And to my certain knowledge, more than one lady was sitting down in want of a partner. Mr. Darcy, you cannot deny the fact." "I had not at that time the honor of knowing any lady in the assembly beyond my own party." "True, and nobody can ever be introduced in a ballroom. Well, Colonel Fitzwilliam, what do I play next? My fingers await your orders." "Perhaps," said Darcy, "I should have judged better, had I sought an introduction, but I am ill qualified to recommend myself to strangers." "Shall we ask your cousin the reason of this?" said Elizabeth, still addressing Colonel Fitzwilliam. "Shall we ask him why a man of sense and education, who has lived in the world, is so ill qualified to recommend himself to strangers?" "Elizabeth, come on. He has social anxiety. Don't make fun of him. Come on. Really?" can answer your question, said Fitzwilliam, without applying to him. It is because he will not give himself the trouble. I certainly have not the talent, which some people possess, said Darcy, of conversing easily with those I have never seen before. I cannot catch their tone of conversation, or appear interested in their concerns, as I often see done. My fingers, said Elizabeth, do not move over the instrument in the masterly manner which I see so many women's do. They have not the same force or rapidity, and do not produce the same expression. But then I have always supposed it to be my own fault, because I would not take the trouble of practicing. It is not that I do not believe my fingers as capable as other women's of superior execution. Darcy smiled and said, You are perfectly right. You have employed your time much better. No one admitted to the privilege of hearing you can think anything wanting. We neither of us perform to strangers. Here they were interrupted by Lady Catherine, who called out to know what they were talking of. Elizabeth immediately began playing again. Lady Catherine approached, and after listening for a few minutes, said to Darcy, Miss Bennet would not play at all amiss if she practiced more, and could have the advantage of a London master. This lady, holy crap. She has a very good notion of Jane Austen, why you gotta do this to me? She has a very good notion of fingering, though her taste is not equal to Anne's. Anne would have been a delightful performer had her health allowed her to learn. Elizabeth looked at Darcy to see how cordially he assented to his cousin's praise, but neither at that moment nor at any other could she discern any symptom of love. And from the whole of his behavior to Miss de Bourgh, she derived this comfort for Miss Bingley, that he might have been just as likely to marry her, had she been his relation. Lady Catherine continued her remarks on Elizabeth's performance, mixing with them many instructions on execution and taste. Elizabeth received them all with all the forbearance of civility, and at the request of the gentleman remained at the instrument till her ladyship's carriage was ready to take them all home. Darcy's like, what? Darcy's like, I sincerely hope that Elizabeth has a good notion of fingering. Wow. Yes, I'm a 12-year-old. I'm sorry. Hold on, gotta get a drink. Chapter 9. Elizabeth was sitting by herself the next morning, and writing to Jane, while Mrs. Collins and Maria were gone on business into the village, when she was startled by a ring at the door, and a certain signal of a visitor. As she had heard no carriage, she thought it unlikely to be Lady Catherine. She thought it unlikely to be Lady Catherine, and under that apprehension was putting away her half-finished letter, that she might escape all impertinent questions, when the door opened, and to her very great surprise, Mr. Darcy, and Mr. Darcy only, entered the room. I'm pretty sure that this is a very famous scene. Very famous. He seemed astonished, too, on finding her alone, and apologized for his intrusion by letting her know that he had understood all the ladies to be within. They then sat down, and when her inquiries after Rosings were made, seemed in danger of sinking into total silence. It was absolutely necessary, therefore, to think of something, and in this emergence, recollecting when she had last seen him in Hertfordshire, and feeling curious to know what he would say on the subject of their hasty departure, she observed, "How very suddenly you all quitted Netherfield last November, Mr. Darcy. It must have been a most agreeable surprise to Mr. Bingley to see you all after him so soon. For if I recollect right, he went but the day before. He and his sisters were well, I hope, when you left London?" "Perfectly so, I thank you." She found that she was to receive no other answer, and after a short pause added, "I think I have understood that Mr. Bingley has not much idea of ever returning to Netherfield again." "I have never heard him say so, but it is probable that he may spend very little of his time there in the future. He has many friends, and he is at a time of life when friends and engagements are continually increasing. If he means to be but little at Netherfield, it would be better for the neighborhood that he should give up the place entirely. For then we might possibly get a settled family there, but perhaps Mr. Bingley did not take the house so much for the convenience of the neighborhood as for his own, and we must expect him to keep or quit it on the same principle." "I should not be surprised," said Darcy, "if he were to give it up as soon as any eligible purchase offers." Elizabeth made no answer. She was afraid of talking longer of his friend, and, having nothing else to say, was now determined to leave the trouble of finding a subject to him. He took the hint, and soon began with, "This seems a very comfortable house. Lady Catherine, I believe, did a great deal to it when Mr. Collins first came to Hunsford." "I believe she did, and I am sure she could not have bestowed her kindness on a more grateful object. Mr. Collins appears very fortunate in his choice of a wife." "Yes, indeed. His friends may well rejoice in his having met with one of the very few sensible women who would have accepted him, or have made him happy if they did, or if they had. My friend has an excellent understanding, though I am not certain that I consider her marrying Mr. Collins as the wisest thing she ever did. She seems perfectly happy, however, and in a prudential light. It is certainly a very good match for her. It must be very agreeable to her to be settled within so easy a distance of her own family and friends." An easy distance, do you call it? It is nearly 50 miles. And what is 50 miles of a good road? Little more than half a day's journey. Yes, I call it a very easy distance. I should never have considered the distance as one of the advantages of the match, cried Elizabeth. I should never have said Mrs. Collins was settled near her family. It is a proof of your own attachment to Hertfordshire. Anything beyond the very neighborhood of Longbourn, I suppose, would appear far. As he spoke, there was a sort of smile, which Elizabeth fancied she understood. He must be supposing her to be thinking of Jane and Netherfield. And she blushed as she answered, I do not mean to say that a woman may not be settled too near her family. The far and the near must be relative, and depend on many varying circumstances. Where there is fortune to make the experience of traveling unimportant, distance becomes no evil. But that is not the case here. Mr. and Mrs. Collins have a comfortable income, but not such a one as will allow of frequent journeys. And I am persuaded my friend would not call herself near her family under less than half of the present distance. Mr. Darcy drew his chair a little towards her, and said, You cannot have a right to such a very strong local attachment. You cannot have always been at Longbourn. Elizabeth looked surprised. The gentleman experienced some change of feeling. He drew back his chair, took a newspaper from the table, and glancing over it, said in a colder voice, Are you pleased with Kent? A short dialogue on the subject of the country ensued, on either side calm and concise, and soon put an end to by the entrance of Charlotte and her sister, just returned from their walk. The tete-a-tete surprised them. The tete-a-tete. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's French. And I don't remember any of my French from school. Mr. Darcy related the mistake which had occasioned his intruding on Miss Bennet, and after sitting a few minutes longer, without saying much to anybody, went away. But when Elizabeth told of his silence, it did not seem very likely, even to Charlotte's wishes, to be the case. And after various conjectures, they could at least only suppose his visit to proceed from the difficulty of finding anything to do, which was the more probable from the time of year. All field sports were over. Within doors there was Lady Catherine, books, and a billiard table, but gentlemen cannot always be within doors. And in the nearness of the parsonage, or the pleasantness of the walk to it, or of the people who lived in it, the two cousins found a temptation from this period of walking thither almost every day. They called at various times of the morning, sometimes separately, sometimes together, and now and then accompanied by their aunt. It was plain to them all that Colonel Fitzwilliam came because he had the pleasure in their society, a persuasion which, of course, recommended him still more, and Elizabeth was reminded by her own satisfaction in being with him, as well as by his evident admiration of her former favorite, George Wickham. And though in comparing them she saw there was far less captivating softness in Colonel Fitzwilliam's manners, she believed he might have been the best informed mind. But why Mr. Darcy came so often to the parsonage, it was more difficult to understand. It could not be for society, as he frequently sat there 10 minutes together without opening his lips, and when he did speak, it seemed the effect of necessity rather than of choice, a sacrifice to propriety, not a pleasure to himself. He seldom appeared really animated. Mrs. Collins knew not what to make of him. Colonel Fitzwilliams, occasionally laughing at his stupidity, provided that he was generally different, which her own knowledge of him could not have told her. As she would have liked to believe this change the effect of love, and the object of that love, her friend Eliza, she set herself seriously to work to find it out. She watched him whenever they were at Rosings, and whenever he came to Hunsford, but without much success. He certainly looked at her friend a great deal, but the expression of that look was disputable. It was an earnest, steadfast gaze, but she often doubted whether there were much admiration in it, and sometimes it seemed nothing but absence of mind. She had once or twice suggested to Elizabeth the possibility of his being partial to her, but Elizabeth always laughed at the idea, and Mrs. Collins did not think it right to press the subject, from the danger of raising expectations which might only end in disappointment, for in her opinion it admitted not of a doubt that all her friend's dislike would vanish if she could suppose him to be in her power. In her kind schemes for Elizabeth, she sometimes planned her marrying Colonel Fitzwilliam. He was beyond comparison the pleasantest man. He certainly admired her, and his situation in life was most eligible. But to counterbalance these advantages, Mr. Darcy had considerable patronage in the church, and his cousin could have none at all. Charlotte is a Darcy Lizzie or Elizabeth shipper, by the way. Would that be called Dizzy or Larcy? I don't know. We have to we'll have to workshop that, I guess. That was not the scene that I thought it was going to be. But we shall see. We shall see soon. Okay. Chapter 10. More than once did Elizabeth, in her ramble within the park, unexpectedly meet Mr. Darcy. I wonder why that could be. She felt all the perverseness of the mischance that should bring him where no one else was brought, and to prevent its ever happening again, took care to inform him at first that it was a favorite haunt of hers. How could it occur a second time, therefore, was very odd. Yet it did, and even a third. It seemed like willful ill nature, or a voluntary penance, for on these occasions it was not merely a few formal inquiries and an awkward pause and then away, but he actually thought it necessary to turn back and walk with her. He never said a great deal, nor did she give herself the trouble of talking or of listening much, but it struck her in the course of their third rencontre that he was asking some odd unconnected questions about her pleasure in being at Hunsford, her love of solitary walks, and her opinion of Mr. and Mrs. Collins's happiness. and that in speaking of Rosings and her not perfectly understanding the house, he seemed to expect that whenever she came into Kent again, she would be staying there too. His words seemed to imply it. Could he have Colonel Fitzwilliam in his thoughts? She supposed, if he meant anything, he must mean an allusion to what might arise in that quarter. It distressed her a little, and she was quite glad to find herself at the gate in the pales opposite the parsonage. She was engaged one day as she walked, in re-pursuing Jane's last letter, and dwelling on some passages which proved that Jane had not written in spirits, when instead of being again surprised by Mr. Darcy, she saw on looking up that Colonel Fitzwilliam was meeting her. Putting away the letter immediately and forcing a smile, she said, "I did not know that you ever walked this way." "I have been making the tour to the park," he replied, "as I generally do every year, and intended to close it with a call at the parsonage. Are you going much farther?" "No, I should have turned in a moment." And accordingly she did turn, and they walked towards the parsonage together. "Do you certainly leave Kent on Saturday?" she said. "Yes, if Darcy does not put it off again. But I am at his disposal. He arranges the business just as he pleases. And if not able to please himself in the arrangement, he has at least great pleasure in the power of choice. I do not know anybody who seems to more enjoy the power of doing what he likes than Mr. Darcy. He likes to have his own way very well," replied Colonel Fitzwilliam, "but so do we all. It is only that he has much better means of having it than many others, because he is rich, and many others are poor. I speak feelingly. A younger son, you know, must be inured to self-denial and dependence. In my opinion, the younger son of an earl can know very little of either. Now, seriously, what have you ever known of self-denial and dependence? When have you been prevented by want of money from going wherever you chose, or procuring anything you had the fancy for? These are home questions, and perhaps I cannot say it. I cannot say that I have experienced many hardships of that nature, but in matters of greater weight, I may suffer from the want of money. Younger sons cannot marry where they like, unless where they like women of fortune, which I think they very often do. Our habits of expense make us too dependent, and there are not many in my rank of life who can afford to marry without some attention to money. Is this, thought Elizabeth, meant for me? And she colored at that idea, but recovering herself, said in a lively tone, "And pray, what is the usual price of an earl's younger son? Unless the elder brother is very sickly, I suppose you would not ask above 50,000 pounds. Probably for a dowry, maybe. I don't know." He answered her in the same style, and the subject dropped. To interrupt a silence which might make him fancy her affected with what had passed, she soon afterwards said, "I imagine your cousin brought you down with him chiefly for the sake of having somebody at his disposal. I wonder he does not marry to secure a lasting convenience of that kind. But perhaps his sister does as well for the present, and as she is his sole care, he may do what he likes with her." "No," said Colonel Fitzwilliam, "that is an advantage which he must divide with me. I am joined with him in the guardianship of Miss Darcy." "Are you indeed? And pray what sort of guardians do you make? Does your charge give you much trouble? Young ladies of her age are sometimes a little difficult to manage, and if she has the true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way. As she spoke, she observed him, looking at her earnestly, and the manner in which he immediately asked her why she supposed Miss Darcy likely to give them any uneasiness, convinced her that she had somehow or other got pretty near the truth. She directly replied, "You need not be frightened. I never heard any harm of her, and I dare say she is one of the most tractable creatures in the world. She is a very great favorite with some ladies of my acquaintance, Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley. I think I heard you say that you know them. I know them a little. Their brother is a pleasant gentlemanlike man. He is a great friend of Darcy's." "Oh, yes," said Elizabeth dryly. "Mr. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley, and takes a prodigious deal of care of him." "Care of him?" "Yes, I really believe Darcy does take care of him in those points where he most wants care. From something he told me in our journey hither, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him. But I ought to beg his pardon, for I have no right to suppose that Bingley was the person meant. It was all conjecture." "Uh-oh. Here it comes." "What is it you mean?" "It is a circumstance which Darcy, of course, would not wish to be generally known, because if it were to get around to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing." Uh-oh. Are you ready, chat? Are you ready to be Madge? Can I get some angry emotes in the chat? You may depend upon my not mentioning it. And remember that I have not much reason for supposing it to be Bingley. What he told me was merely this: that he congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, but without mentioning names or any other particulars, and I only suspected it to be Bingley from believing him the kind of young man to get into a scrape of that sort, and from knowing them to have been together the whole of last summer. Did Mr. Darcy give you his reasons for this interference? I understood that there were some very strong objections against the lady. And what arts did he use to separate them? Angry Madge! Darcy! Curse you, Darcy! He did not talk to me of his own arts, said Fitzwilliam, smiling. He only told me what I have now told you. Elizabeth made no answer, and walked on, her heart swelling with indignation. After watching her a little, Fitzwilliam asked her why she was so thoughtful. "I am thinking of what you have been telling me," said she. "Your cousin's conduct does not suit my feelings. Why was he to be the judge? You are rather disposed to call his interference officious? I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to decide on the propriety of his friend's inclination, or why, upon his own judgment alone, he was to determine and direct in what manner that friend was to be happy." I know, he's trying so hard. He's trying so hard to tell Elizabeth a great, a story about Darcy in which he is being the hero, and he picked the one story. He picked the one wrong story. Totally by accident. Good guy Darcy failed by good guy Fitzwilliam. I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to decide on the propriety of his friend's inclination, or why, upon his own judgment alone, was he to determine and direct in what manner that friend was to be happy. But, she continued, recollecting herself, as we know none of the particulars, it is not fair to condemn him. It is to be supposed that there was much affection in the case. That is not an unnatural surmise, said Fitzwilliam, but it is lessening the honor of my cousin's triumph very sadly. This was spoken jestingly, but it appeared to her so just a picture of Mr. Darcy that she would not trust herself with an answer, and therefore, abruptly changing the conversation, talked on indifferent matters till they reached the parsonage. There, shut in her own room, as soon as their visitor left them, she could think without interruption of all that she had heard. It was not to be supposed that any other people could be meant than those with whom she was connected. There could not exist in the world two men over whom Mr. Darcy could have such boundless influence. That he had been concerned in the measures taken to separate Mr. Bingley and Jane, she had never doubted. But she had always attributed to Miss Bingley the principal design and arrangement of them. If his own vanity, however, did not mislead him, he was the cause. His pride and caprice were the cause of all that Jane had suffered, and still continued to suffer. He had ruined for a while every hope of happiness for the most affectionate, generous heart in the world, and no one could say how lasting an evil he might have inflicted. There were some very strong objections against the lady, were Colonel Fitzwilliam's words, and these strong objections probably were her having one uncle who was a country attorney, and another who was in business in London. To Jane herself, she exclaimed, there could be no possibility of objection. All loveliness and goodness as she is, her understanding excellent, her mind improved, and her manners captivating. Neither could anything be urged against my father, who, though with some peculiarities, his ability which Mr. Darcy himself need not disdain, and respectability which he will probably never reach. When she thought of her mother, indeed, her confidence gave way a little, but she would not allow any objections there had material weight with Mr. Darcy, whose pride, she was convinced, would receive a deeper wound from the want of importance in his friends' connections than from their want of sense. And she was quite decided at last that he had been partly governed by this worst kind of pride, and partly by the wish of retaining Mr. Bingley for his sister. The agitation and tears which the subject occasioned brought on a headache, and it grew so much worse towards the evening that, added to her unwillingness to see Mr. Darcy, it determined her not to attend her cousins to Rosings, where they were engaged to tea. Mrs. Collins, seeing that she was really unwell, did not press her to go, and was as much as possible, prevented her husband from pressing her. But Mr. Collins could not conceal his apprehension of Lady Catherine's being rather displeased by her staying at home. Oof. Darcy. Oh no. What you do? What you do? What have you done? Okay. Chapter 9. Chapter 11. I can read. I know the Roman numerals good. I know them good, yeah. Chapter 11. When they were gone, Elizabeth, as if intending to exasperate herself as much as possible against Mr. Darcy, chose for employment the examination of all the letters which Jane had written to her since her being in Kent. They contained no actual complaint, nor was there any revival of past occurrences, or any communication of present suffering. But in all, and in most every line of each, there was a want of that cheerfulness which had been used to characterize her style, and which, proceeding from the serenity of a mind at ease with itself, and kindly disposed towards everyone, had been scarcely ever clouded. Elizabeth noticed every sentence conveying the idea of uneasiness, with an attention which it had hardly received on the first perusal. Mr. Darcy's shameful boast of what misery he had been able to inflict gave her a keener sense of her sister's sufferings. It was some consolation to think that her visit to Rosings was to end on the day after next, and a still greater in that in less than a fortnight she should herself be with Jane again, and enabled to contribute to the recovery of her spirits by all that affection could do. She could not think of Darcy's leaving Kent without remembering that his cousin was to go with him, but Colonel Fitzwilliam had made it clear that he had no intentions at all, and agreeable as he was, she did not mean to be unhappy about him. While settling this point, she was suddenly aroused by the sound of the doorbell, and her spirits were a little fluttered by the idea of its being Colonel Fitzwilliam himself, who had once before called late in the evening, and might now come to inquire, particularly after her. But this idea was soon banished, and her spirits were very directly affected when, to her utter amazement, here it is. This is the scene. This is the scene that we've all been waiting for. Here we go, chat. Here we go. But this idea was soon banished, and her spirits were very differently affected when, to her utter amazement, she saw Mr. Darcy walk into the room. In a hurried manner, he immediately began an inquiry after her health, imputing his visit to a wish of hearing that she were better. She answered him with cold civility. He sat down for a few moments, and then, getting up, walked about the room. Elizabeth was surprised, but said not a word. After a silence of several minutes, he came towards her in an agitated manner, and thus began. In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, colored, doubted, and was silent. This he considered sufficient encouragement, and the avowal of all that he felt, and had long felt for her, immediately followed. Cringe! 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 Oh God. Cringe. We're cringing, chap. We gotta cringe for poor Darcy. He picked the wrong day to do this. Like, the wrongest day ever. Just, nope. He spoke well, but there were feelings besides those of the heart to be detailed, and he was not more eloquent on the subject of tenderness than of pride. His sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation of the family obstacles, which judgment had always opposed to inclination, were dwelt on with a warmth which seemed due to the consequence he was wounding, but was very unlikely to recommend his suit. In spite of her deeply rooted dislike, she could not be insensible to the compliment of such a man's affection, and though her intentions did not vary for an instant, she was at first sorry for the pain he was to receive, till, roused but to resentment by his subsequent language, she lost all compassion in anger. She tried, however, to compose herself to answer him with patience, when he should have done. He concluded with representing to her the strength of that attachment which, in spite of all his endeavors, he had found impossible to conquer, and with expressing his hope that it would now be rewarded by her acceptance of his hand. As he said this, she could easily see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. Oh, cringe. Run, Darcy! Run! Run! Oh my God! Nope. Run, Darcy. Get out. Get out while you can. Oh, thank you for the Hydrate Your Dream Tavern in the Forest. Thank you very much. We'll take that. Let us take a moment and simply bask in the sheer cringe that is the greatest marriage proposal in the history of English literature. And just, bask in it. It is amazing. And the cringiest thing that has ever been written. So, obviously Darcy did a bad thing when, and we know that as the readers. He did a bad thing when he broke up Bingley and Jane. But he didn't know that. And I do feel bad for Darcy because he knows not what is about to come and he is extremely socially awkward and doesn't know, like, he can't read the room at all. He genuinely loves Lizzie, or Elizabeth. Sorry, I've been binging the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. He truly loves Elizabeth and has so compartmentalized his brain that he doesn't even think there's a contradiction of his feelings between Elizabeth and what he did to Jane. He doesn't understand that it may affect Elizabeth's feelings that he broke up her sister with Bingley. It's just, his brain doesn't work like that. That he doesn't understand why she would be so angry about it. And he also doesn't. Let's also just take a moment to consider how brave this guy is for breaking past his anxiety to go up to the woman he loves and tell her without reservation, I love you. Will you marry me? In spite of all my of all my family's objections, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. And he just does not know what's coming. And I do sincerely feel bad for him. But Elizabeth has every right to be pissed at Darcy. Let us continue. He spoke of apprehension and anxiety, but his countenance expressed real security. Such a circumstance could only exasperate further, and when he ceased, the color rose into her cheeks, and she said, "In such cases as this, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. It is natural that obligation should be felt, and if I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone. It has been most unconsciously done, however, and I hope will be of short duration. The feelings which, you tell me, have long prevented the acknowledgment of your regard, can have little difficulty in overcoming it after this explanation." Mr. Darcy, who was leaning against the mantelpiece, with his eyes fixed on her face, seemed to catch her words with no less resentment than surprise. His complexion became pale with anger, and the disturbance of his mind was visible in every feature. He was struggling for the appearance of composure, and would not open his lips till he believed himself to have attained it. The pause was to Elizabeth's feelings dreadful. At length, in a voice of forced calmness, he said, "And this is all the reply which I am to have the honor of expecting." I might perhaps wish to be informed why, with so little endeavor at civility, I am thus rejected. But it is of small importance. I might as well inquire, replied she, with so little evident a design of offending and insulting me. You chose to tell me that you liked me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. Was not this some excuse for incivility, if I was uncivil? But I have other provocations. You know I have. Had not my own feelings decided against you, had they been indifferent, or had they even been favorable, do you think that any consideration would tempt me to accept the man who has been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of a most beloved sister? As she pronounced these words, Mr. Darcy changed color, but the emotion was short, and he listened without attempting to interrupt her while she continued. I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. No motive can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part you acted there. You cannot deny that you have been the principal, if not the only means of dividing them from each other, of exposing one of the censure of the world for caprice and instability, the other to its derision for disappointed hopes, and involving them both in misery of the acutest kind. She paused and saw with no slight of indignation that he was listening with an air which proved him wholly unmoved by any feeling of remorse. He even looked at her with a smile of affected incredulity. Can you deny that you have done it? She repeated. With amused tranquillity, he then replied, I have no wish of denying that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him, I have been kinder than towards myself. Damn. Elizabeth disdained the appearance of noticing this civil reflection, but its meaning did not escape, nor was it likely to conciliate her. But it is not merely this affair, she continued, on which my dislike is founded. Long before it had taken place, my opinion of you was decided. Your character was unfolded in the recital which I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham. On this subject, what can you have to say? In what imaginary act of friendship can you here defend yourself? Or under what misrepresentation can you here impose upon others? You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns, said Darcy in a less tranquil tone, and with heightened color. Who that knows what his misfortunes have been can help feeling an interest in him? His misfortunes, repeated Darcy contemptuously. Yes, his misfortunes have been great indeed. And of your infliction, cried Elizabeth with energy. You have reduced him to his present state of poverty, comparative poverty. You have withheld the advantages which you must know to have been designed for him. You have deprived the best years of his life of that independence which was no less his due than his desert. You have done all this, and yet you can treat the mention of his misfortunes with contempt and ridicule. And this, cried Darcy, as he walked with quick steps across the room, is your opinion of me? This is the estimation in which you hold me? I thank you for explaining it so fully. My faults, according to this calculations, are heavy indeed, but perhaps, added he, stopping in his walk and turning towards her, these offenses might have been overlooked, had not your pride been hurt by my honest confession of the scruples that had long prevented my forming any serious design. These bitter accusations might have been suppressed, had I with greater policy concealed my struggles, and flattered you into the belief of my being impelled by unqualified, unalloyed inclination, by reason, by reflection, by everything, but disguise of every sort in my abhorrence. But disguise of every sort is my abhorrence, nor am I ashamed of the feelings I related. They were natural and just. Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connections, to congratulate myself on the hope of relations whose condition in life is so decidedly beneath my own? Elizabeth felt herself growing more angry every moment. Yet she tried to the utmost to speak with composure when she said, "You are mistaken, Mr. Darcy. If you suppose that the mode of your declaration affected me in any other way, then as it spared me the concern which I might have felt in refusing you, had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner." She saw him start at this, but he said nothing, and she continued, "You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it." Again, his astonishment was obvious, and he looked at her with an expression of mingled incredulity and mortification. She went on, "From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others, were such as to form that groundwork of disapprobation on which succeeding events have built so immovable a dislike. And had I not known you a month before, I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could have ever prevailed on to marry." "You have said quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings, and have now only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." And with those words, he hastily left the room, and Elizabeth heard him the next moment open the front door and quit the house. The tumult of her mind was now painfully great. She knew not how to support herself, and from actual weakness sat down and cried for half an hour. Her astonishment, as she reflected on what had passed, was increased by every review of it. That she should receive an offer of marriage from Mr. Darcy, that he should have been in love with her for so many months, so much in love as to wish to marry her in spite of all the objections which had made him prevent his friends marrying his sister, or her sister, and which must appear, at least, with equal force in his own case, which was almost incredible. It was gratifying to have inspired unconsciously so strong an affection, but his pride, his abominable pride, his shameless avowal of what he had done with respect to Jane, his unpardonable assurance in acknowledging, though he could not justify it, and the unfeeling manner in which he had mentioned Mr. Wickham, his cruelty towards whom he had not attempted to deny, soon overcame the pity which the consideration of his attachment had for a moment excited. She continued in very agitating reflections till the sound of Lady Catherine's carriage made her feel how unequal she was to encounter Charlotte's observation, and hurried her away to her room. Whew. Okay. How we doing, chat? How we feeling? That was a doozy. So, okay. Darcy, ouch. That ripped me apart. Oh man. Darcy, my dude, never, ever, ever talk about how your potential love and her family are beneath you. Oh my god. Yeah, the hardcore secondhand embarrassment is so real. Like, for real. Ouch. I don't even. Hello, nerdy girl. Yeah, that scene. Darcy's proposal. Ouch. Okay. Whew. All right. Okay. Let's continue. Chapter 12. Yeah, and he wonders why he got turned down. Just the lack of awareness, of social awareness. It's breathtaking. And the fact that he had the balls to ask her to marry him, knowing that he was the reason why Bingley and Jane broke up. Beyond anything else, like it's just amazing. The fact that he had no inkling that she disliked him at all. He just, my dude. Oh my god. Oh, poor Darcy. But also, poor Elizabeth. Because that dude, he straight up told her that her family is like dirt and they're beneath him and poor and yeah, but like that is true. It's true that he had no way of knowing that she knew it was him that broke them up, but that doesn't make it better. That like makes it kind of worse, because he was totally fine just like lying to her to keep his pride. He was totally fine just like letting her never find out that he was the one who broke up Bingley and Jane. Just lying to her as his wife every single day and hoping that she never found out, because if she did find out, it would be hell. You know? Like, man. Take another drink. Chapter 12. Elizabeth awoke the next morning to the same thoughts and meditations which had at length closed her eyes. Yeah, typical. Typical dude. Man, I sure hope my wife doesn't find out that I did this horrible thing. Here's a shortcut to this line of thinking. They will always find out. I mean, in his view, he's just allowing. Yeah, but like, yeah, no, you're totally right. But how, like, if I thought that his the problem he had was that that Jane and Elizabeth's family was using Bingley to like get a leg up in society. I thought that was one of his like that was one of the detractions, that they were totally using Bingley to get his money because of how much lower in society they were. I could be wrong. And it's possible that he's definitely looking out for his friend, right? Like he's trying to defend Bingley against who he views as like leeches, basically, societal and economic leeches, because he thinks that Jane is. No, there's an ad. Hold on. I will shut up for a second so we can continue this conversation after the ad. Take a drink. Okay, almost ready. But yeah, I understand that Darcy thinks that he's doing right because he's like defending his friend. From what he sees is an undesirable match for him. But he's still being a dick. Hi, Sophia. Welcome, and thank you for the raid. Welcome, raiders. Let me do a quick shout out. I hope that you had a wonderful stream. What were you streaming? Oh, nice. That's so good. That's The Knight's Tale from Canterbury Tales. Nice. Very nice. Let me. If you guys don't know Sophia, you should definitely check her out. She is, she's another book reader, like me, and she's a wonderful reader, and she will she will put you to sleep with her wonderful voice. No problem. Thank you, Sophia, for the raid, and welcome, raiders. I am Emrys, the Fae Librarian VTuber, and we are reading Pride and Prejudice. And Sophia, you just missed the single greatest secondhand embarrassment cringe scene in all of English literature. I'm sorry to inform you. We just read Darcy's proposal of Elizabeth, and we were talking. Yeah, it's a great scene, and we were talking about like what we were kind of unpacking that scene just before you came in, about how Darcy thought that he was doing good, but he was deluded in thinking that that Elizabeth would accept him. Yes, Wuthering Heights. Yes, classics. Let's go. Yes. I haven't read Wuthering Heights in a long time. It's been, I think I read it freshman year of college. That's a great, like, really creepy book, if I remember correctly. How's Heathcliff doing? How's his attic doing? Scheming. Oh no. Soon he will be plotting. Specifically in Graveyard. But no spoilers. No spoilers. But yeah, that's great. So yeah. Darcy has been rejected quite thoroughly, and now we shall continue. Chapter 12. Yeah, suck it, Darcy. Chapter 12. Elizabeth awoke the next morning to the same thoughts and meditations which had at length closed her eyes. She could not yet recover from the surprise of what had happened. It was impossible to think of anything else, and totally indisposed for employment, she resolved soon after breakfast to indulge herself in air and exercise. She was proceeding directly to her favorite walk, when the recollection of Mr. Darcy's sometimes coming there stopped her, and instead of entering the park, she turned up the lane, which led her farther from the turnpike road. The park paling was still the boundary on one side, and she soon passed out of the gates into the ground. After walking 2 or 3 times along that part of the lane, she was tempted, by the pleasantness of the morning, to stop at the gates and look into the park. The 5 weeks which she had now passed in Kent had made a great difference in the country, and every day was adding to the verdure of the early trees. She was on the point of continuing her walk, when she caught a glimpse of a gentleman within the sort of grove which edged the park. He was moving that way, and fearful of its being Mr. Darcy, she was directly retreating. But the person who advanced was now near enough to see her, and, stepping forward with eagerness, pronounced her name. She had turned away, but on hearing herself called, though in a voice which proved it to be Mr. Darcy, she moved towards the gate. He had by that time reached it also, and holding out a letter, which she instinctively took, said with a look of haughty composure, "I have been walking in the grove some time in the hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honor of reading that letter?" And then, with a slight bow, turned again into the plantation, and was soon out of sight. With no expectation of pleasure, but with the strongest curiosity, Elizabeth opened the letter, and to her still increasing wonder, perceived an envelope containing 2 sheets of letter paper, written quite through in a very close hand. The envelope itself was likewise full. Pursuing her way along the lane, she then began it. It was dated from Rosings, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and was as follows. "Be not alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter, by the apprehension of its containing any repetition of those sentiments, or renewal of those offers, which were last night so disgusting to you. I write without any intention of paining you. Or humbling myself by dwelling on wishes which, for the happiness of both, cannot be too soon forgotten. And the effort which the formation and the perusal of this letter must occasion should have been spared, had not my character required it to be written and read. You must, therefore, pardon the freedom which I demand to your attention. Your feelings, I know, will bestow it unwillingly, but I demand it of your justice. 2 offenses of a very different nature, and by no means of equal magnitude, you last night laid to my charge. The first mention was, that regardless of the sentiments of either, I had detached Mr. Bingley from your sister, and the other, that I had, in defiance of various claims, in defiance of honor and humanity, ruined the immediate prosperity and blasted the prospects of Mr. Wickham." Yes, it is an excellent book, both of them, Wuthering Heights and Pride and Prejudice, excellent books. "Willfully and wantonly to have thrown off the companion of my youth, the acknowledged favorite of my father, a young man who had scarcely any other dependence than on our patronage, and who had been brought up to expect its exertion, would be a depravity to which the separation of 2 young persons, whose affection could be the growth of only a few weeks, could bear no comparison. But from the severity of that blame which was last night so liberally bestowed, respecting each circumstance, I shall hope to be in future secured. When the following account of my actions and their motives has been read, if, in the explanation of them, which is due to myself, I am under the necessity of relating feelings which may be offensive to yours, I can only say that I am sorry. The necessity must be obeyed, and farther apology would be absurd. I had not been long in Herefordshire before I saw, in common with others, that Bingley preferred your eldest sister to any other woman in the country. But it was not till the evening of the dance at Netherfield that I had any apprehension of his feeling a serious attachment. I had often seen him in love before. At that ball, while I had the honor of dancing with you, I was first made acquainted, by Sir William Lucas's accidental information, that Bingley's attentions to your sister have given rise to a general expectation of their marriage. He spoke of it as a certain event, of which the time alone could be undecided. From that moment I observed my friend's behavior attentively, and I could then perceive that his partiality for Miss Bennet was beyond that what I had ever witnessed in him. Your sister I also watched. Her look and manners were open, cheerful, and engaging as ever, but without any symptom of peculiar regard. I remained convinced from the evening's scrutiny that though she received his attentions with pleasure, she did not invite them by any participation of sentiment. If you have not been mistaken here, I must have been in error. Your superior knowledge of your sister must make the latter probable. If it be so, if I have misled by such error, to inflict pain on her, your resentment has not been unreasonable. But I shall not scruple to assert that the serenity of your sister's countenance and air was such as might have given the most acute observer a conviction that, however amiable her temper, her heart was not likely to be easily touched. That I was desirous of believing her indifferent is certain, but I will venture to say that my investigations and decisions are not usually influenced by my hopes or fears. I do not believe her to be indifferent because I wished it. I believed it on impartial conviction, as truly as I wished it in reason. My objections to the marriage were not merely those which I last night acknowledged to have required the utmost force of passion to put aside. He's totally impartial. What are you talking about? He's definitely impartial. My objections to the marriage were not merely those which I last night acknowledged to have required the utmost force of passion to put aside. In my own case, the want of connection could not be so great an evil to my friend as to me. But there were other causes of repugnance, causes which, though still existing, and existing to an equal degree in both instances, I had myself endeavored to forget, because they were not immediately before me. These causes must be stated, though briefly. The situation of your mother's family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison of that total want of propriety so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. Pardon me, if it pains me to offend you, but amidst your concern for the defects of your nearest relations, and your displeasure at this representation of them, let it give you consolation to consider that, to have conducted yourselves so as to avoid any share of the like censure is praise no less generally bestowed on you and your elder sister, than it is honorable to the sense of disposition of both. Yeesh. Darcy, we gotta talk about your manners. You're so utterly hopeless at being nice. It's one of those things. It's like yeah, Darcy, I love you, but your family is white trash. Yeah, it's just Darcy, come on. It's like when someone tells you that they're just being honest, but every time they say anything, they're just being a dick. And I think that Darcy does not know how to be honest without being a blunt instrument. And he needs to learn how to be a person. Yeah, that kind of person. Yep. Exactly. Let's see, where did I leave off? I will only say further that from what passed that evening, my opinion of all parties was confirmed, and every inducement heightened, which could have led me before to preserve my friend from what I esteemed a most unhappy connection. He left Netherfield for London on the day following, as you, I am certain, remember, with the design of soon returning. Yeah, exactly. He's young and handsome and single and rich, as Lizzie Bennet would say in the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Young, rich, and handsome, must be in want of a wife. He can do whatever the hell he wants. The part which I acted is now explained. His sister's uneasiness had been equally excited with my own. Our coincidence of feeling was soon discovered, and alike sensible that no time was to be lost in detaching their brother. We shortly resolved on joining him directly in London. We accordingly went, and there I readily engaged in the office of pointing out to my friend the certain evils of such a choice. I described and enforced them earnestly. But however this remonstrance might have staggered or delayed his determination, I do not suppose that it would ultimately have prevented the marriage, had it not been seconded by the assurance which I hesitated not in giving, of your sister's indifference. He had before believed her to return his affection with sincere, if not with equal regard. But Bingley has great natural modesty, with a stronger dependence on my judgment than his own. To convince him, therefore, that he had deceived himself was no very difficult point. To persuade him against returning to Hertfordshire, when that conviction had been given, was scarcely the work of a moment. I cannot blame myself for having done this much. There is but one part of my conduct in the whole affair on which I do not reflect with satisfaction. It is that I condescended to adopt the measures of art, so far as to conceal from him your sister's being in town. I knew it myself, as it was known to Miss Bingley, but her brother is even yet ignorant of it. That they might have met without ill consequence is perhaps probable, but his regard did not appear to me enough extinguished from him to see her without some danger. Perhaps this concealment, this disguise, was beneath me. It is done, however, and it was done for the best. On this subject, I have nothing more to say, no other apology to offer. If I have wounded your sister's feelings, it was unknowingly done. And though the motives which govern me may, to you, which govern me may to you very naturally appear insufficient. I have not yet learned to condemn them. Thank you, Zella, for the hydrate redeem. With respect to that other, more weighty accusation of having injured Mr. Wickham, I can only refute it by laying before you the whole of his connection with my family. Yeah, Darcy brags about his actions, then says he has no apology to give. He did say he was sorry once in one sentence at the very beginning. Of his explanation, but Darcy, I want to see some begging. Like, holy crap. I want to see you beg at the feet of Elizabeth Bennet and particularly Jane Bennet, at their feet for their forgiveness and for their pardon, and just, holy crap, you did this family wrong. Okay, yeah. Seriously, Darcy, come on. You barely apologized the first time. Of what he has particularly accused me, I am ignorant, but of the truth of what I shall relate, I can summon more than one witness of undoubted veracity. Yeah, exactly. Not an apology if you openly brag about the actions that you took that you're supposedly sorry about. Darcy really is very arrogant and, all that stuff. So, yeah. Not a great apology. He's apologizing in the same way that that people in modern day like influencers who do like something horrible to somebody, and then they only apologize when they're caught, and they say, I am like, and they apologize by saying, I'm sorry that you got offended. Yeah, it's the same way that politicians apologize. I'm sorry that you got offended by the fact that I did a horrible thing that I'm totally proud of and would have done again and would do again this second. Thanks, Darcy. It's a good thing that he's young, handsome, and rich, because otherwise he would never get married. Not even Mrs. Bennet would try to get him married. Mr. Wickham is the son of a very respectable man who had for many years the management of all the Pemberley estates, and whose good conduct in the discharge of his trust naturally inclined my father to be of a service to him, and on George Wickham, who was his godson, his kindness was therefore liberally bestowed. My father supported him at school, and afterwards at Cambridge. Most important assistance, as his own father, always poor from the extravagance of his wife, would have been unable to give him a gentleman's education. My father was not only fond of this young man's society, whose manners were always engaging, he had also the highest opinion of him, and hoping the church would be his profession, intended to provide for him in it. Hold on just a second. No, oh no. I got the page wet. Oh no. Oh no. This is an emergency. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. We're good. As for myself, it is many, many years since I first began to think of him in any different manner. The vicious propensities... Party foul! Yellow card! Red card! Isn't that one of, like, the red card? That's from the sports ball, isn't it? I think so. The vicious propensities, the want of principle which he was careful to guard from the knowledge of his best friend, could not escape the observation of a young man of nearly the same age with himself, and who had opportunities of seeing him in unguarded moments, which Mr. Darcy could not have. Here again I shall give you pain. To what degree you can only tell. You only can tell. But whatever may be the sentiments which Mr. Wickham has created, a suspicion of their nature shall not prevent me from unfolding his real character. It adds even another motive. My excellent father died about 5 years ago. And his attachment to Mr. Wickham was to the last so steady that in his will he particularly recommended it to me to promote his advancement in the best manner that his profession might allow, and if he took orders, desired that a valuable family living might be his as soon as it became vacant. There was also a legacy of £1,000. His own father did not long survive mine, and within a half year from these events, Mr. Wickham wrote to inform me that, having finally resolved against taking orders, he hoped I should not think it unreasonable for him to expect some more immediate pecuniary advantage in lieu of the preferment, by which he could not be benefited. He had some intention, he added, of studying the law, and I must be aware that the interest of £1,000 would be a very insufficient support therein. I rather wished than believed him to be sincere, but at any moment was perfectly ready to accede to his proposal. I knew that Mr. Wickham ought not to be a clergyman. The business was therefore soon settled. He resigned all claim to assistance in the church, were it possible that he could ever have been in a situation to receive it, and accepted in return £3,000. All connection between us seemed now dissolved. I thought too ill of him to invite him to Pemberley, or admit his society in town. In town, I believe he chiefly lived. In town, I believe he chiefly lived, but his studying the law was a mere pretense. And being now free from all restraint, his life was a life of idleness and dissipation. For about 3 years I heard little of him. but on the decease of the incumbent of the living which had been designed for him, he applied to me again by letter for the presentation. His circumstances, he assured me, and I had no difficulty in believing it, were exceedingly bad. He had found the law a most unprofitable study, and was now absolutely resolved on being ordained. If I would present him to the living in question, of which he trusted there could be little doubt, as he was well assured that I had no other person to provide for, and I could not have forgotten my revered father's intentions, you will hardly blame me for refusing to comply with this entreaty, and for resisting every repetition of it. His resentment was in proportion to the distress of his circumstances, and he was doubtless as violent in his abuse of me to others as in his reproaches to myself. After this period, every appearance of acquaintance was dropped. How he lived, I know not. But at last summer, he was again most painfully obtruded on my notice. I must now mention a circumstance which I would wish to forget myself. And which no obligation less than present should induce me to unfold to any human being. Having said thus much, I feel no doubt of your secrecy. My sister, who was more than 10 years my junior, was left to the guardianship of my mother's nephew, Colonel Fitzwilliam, and myself. About a year ago, she was taken from school, and an establishment formed for her in London. And last summer, she went with the lady who presided over it to Ramsgate, and thither also went Mr. Wickham, undoubtedly by design, for there proved to have been a prior acquaintance between him and Mrs. Young, in whose character we were most unhappily deceived, and by her connivance and aid, he so far recommended himself to Georgiana, whose affectionate heart retained a strong impression of his kindness to her as a child, that she was persuaded to believe it herself in love, and to consent to an elopement. She was then but 15, which must be her excuse, and after stating her imprudence, I am happy to add that I owed the knowledge of it to herself. I joined them unexpectedly a day or two before the intended elopement, and then Georgiana, unable to support the idea of grieving and offending a brother whom she almost looked up to as a father, acknowledged the whole to me. You may imagine what I felt and how I acted. Regard for my sister's credit and feelings prevented any public exposure, but I wrote to Mr. Wickham, who left the place immediately, and Mrs. Young, who was, of course, removed from her charge. Mr. Wickham's chief object was unquestionably my sister's fortune, which is £30,000. But I cannot help supposing that the hope of revenging himself on me was a strong inducement. His revenge would have been complete indeed. This, madam, is a faithful narrative of every event in which we have been concerned together. If you do not absolutely reject it as false, you will, I hope, acquit me henceforth of cruelty towards Mr. Wickham. I know not in what manner, under what form of falsehood he has imposed on you, but his success is not perhaps to be wondered at. Ignorant as you are, as you previously were, of everything concerning either. Detection could not be in your power, and suspicion certainly not in your inclination. You may possibly wonder why all this was not told to you last night, but I was not then master enough of myself to know what could or ought to be revealed. For the truth of everything here related, I can appeal more particularly to the testimony of Colonel Fitzwilliam, who, from our near relationship and constant intimacy, and still more as one of the executors of my father's will, has been unavoidably acquainted with every particular of these transactions. If your abhorrence of me should make my assertions valueless, you cannot be prevented by the same cause from confiding in my cousin, and that there may be the possibility of consulting him, I shall endeavor to find some opportunity of putting this letter in your hands in the course of the morning. I will only add, God bless you, Fitzwilliam Darcy. Well, Darcy, you definitely did right in telling Elizabeth about why about the whole story about Mr. Wickham. But you still done fucked up with Jane. You still done fucked up. Chapter 13. If Elizabeth, when Mr. Darcy gave her the letter, did not expect it to contain a renewal of his offers, she had formed no expectation at all of its contents. But such as they were, it may be well supposed how eagerly she went through them, and what a contrariety of emotion they excited. Her feelings as she read were scarcely to be defined. With amazement did she first understand that he believed any apology to be in his power, and steadfastly she was persuaded that he could have no explanation to give, which a just sense of shame would not conceal. With a strong prejudice against everything he might say, she began his account of what had happened at Netherfield. She read, with an eagerness which hardly left her power of comprehension, and from impatience of knowing what the next sentence might bring, was incapable of attending to the sense of the one before her eyes. His belief of her sister's insensibility she instantly resolved to be false, and his account of the worst objections to the match made her too angry to have any wish of doing him justice. He expressed no regret for what he had done which satisfied her. His style was not penitent, but haughty. It was all pride and insolence. I mean, he is pride and she is prejudice. That's the book. That's the book right there, guys. But when this subject was succeeded by his account of Mr. Wickham, when she read with somewhat clearer attention a relation of events which, if true, must overthrow every cherished opinion of his worth, and which bore so alarming an affinity to his own history of himself. Her feelings were yet more acutely painful, and were more difficult of definition. Astonishment, apprehension, and even horror oppressed her. She wished to discredit it entirely, repeatedly exclaiming, "This must be false! This cannot be! This must be the grossest falsehood!" And when she had gone through the whole letter, though scarcely knowing anything of the last page or two, put it hastily away, protesting that she would not regard it, and that she would never look at it again. In this perturbed state of mind, with thoughts that could rest on nothing, she walked on. But it would not do. In half a minute, the letter was unfolded again, and collecting herself as well as she could, she again began the mortifying perusal of all that related to Wickham, and commanded herself so far as to examine the meaning of every sentence. The account of his connection with the Pemberley family was exactly what he had related himself, and the kindness of the late Mr. Darcy, though she had not known before its extent, agreed equally well with his own words. So far each recital confirmed the other, but when she came to the will, the difference was great. What Wickham had said of the living was fresh in her memory, and as she recalled his very words, it was impossible not to feel that there was gross duplicity on one side or the other, and for a few moments she flattered herself that her wishes did not err. But when she read and reread with the closest attention the particulars immediately following of Wickham's resigning all pretenses to the living, of his receiving in lieu so considerable a sum as £3,000, again was she forced to hesitate. She put down the letter, weighed every circumstance with what she meant to be impartiality, deliberated on the probability of each statement, but with little success. On both sides it was only assertion. Again she read on, but every line proved more clearly that the affair, which she had believed it impossible that any contrivance could so represent, as to render Mr. Darcy's conduct in it less than infamous, was capable of a turn which must make him entirely blameless throughout the whole. The extravagance and general profligacy which he scrupled not to lay to Mr. Wickham's charge exceedingly shocked her. The more so as she could bring no proof of its injustice. She had never heard of him before his entrance into the militia, in which he had engaged at the persuasion of the young men, of the young man who, on meeting him accidentally in town, had there renewed a slight acquaintance. Of his former way of life, nothing had been known in Herefordshire but what he told himself. As to his real character, had information been in her power, she had never felt a wish of inquiring. His countenance, voice, and manner had established him at once in the possession of every virtue. She tried to recollect some instance of goodness, some distinguished trait of integrity or benevolence, that might rescue him from the attacks of Mr. Darcy, or at least, by the predominance of virtue, atone for those casual errors, under which she would endeavor to class what Mr. Darcy had described as the idleness and vice of many years' continuance. But no such recollection befriended her. She could see him instantly before her, in every charm of air and address, but she could remember no more substantial good. No more substantial good. Countenance. It'd be interesting to take all these older texts and basically do a search of all of these words that they say, so they repeat so often, and be like, how many times did you say this word? Probably a lot. She could see him instantly before her in every charm and address. But she could remember no more substantial good than the general approbation of the neighborhood, and the regard which his social powers had gained him in the mess. After pausing on this point a considerable while, she once more continued to read. But alas, the story which followed of his designs on Miss Darcy received some confirmation from what had passed between Colonel Fitzwilliams and herself only the morning before, and at last she was referred for the truth of every particular to Colonel Fitzwilliam himself, from whom she had previously received the information of his near concern in all his cousin's affairs, and whose character she had no reason to question. At one time she had almost resolved on applying to him, but the idea was checked by the awkwardness of the application, and at length wholly banished by the conviction that Mr. Darcy would never have hazarded such a proposal if he had not been well assured of his cousin's corroboration. Nice. 17. Just like the number of emresses in the VTuber sphere. I'm just imagining the Count from Sesame Street. Countenance, 17. 17, A countenance for every emrys. Can I just pause and go on a random tangent about how HBO and WB and Discover are destroying well, I don't know. They're just randomly taking out a bunch of episodes from the Sesame Street library, and it's awful, and they should be condemned for it, and they should leave Sesame Street alone with their corporate greed. I don't care about how much money they think they can save by not storing Sesame Street episodes on their servers. I don't care. They need to leave Sesame Street alone. Okay. I think I'm done. I think that's it. Okay. I think I'm good. A countenance for every empress. Yes. Okay. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Just don't fuck with Sesame Street. Don't fuck with Big Bird. Okay. She perfectly remembered everything that had passed in the conversation between Wickham and herself. How Elizabeth Bennet has an incredible memory, by the way. Does she have like a, not a photographic memory, but like, if she can totally remember everything about conversations that she had months ago, there must be a word for that, right? There has to be a word for that. But it's not photographic memory, obviously, because there's no writing, there's no any of that. Anyway, she perfectly remembered everything that had passed in the conversation between Wickham and herself in their first evening at Mr. Phillips's. Many of his expressions were still fresh in her memory. She was now struck with the impropriety of such communications to a stranger. And wondered it had escaped her before. She saw the indelicacy of putting himself forward as he had done, and the inconsistency of his professions with his conduct. She remembered that he had boasted of having no fear of seeing Mr. Darcy, and that Mr. Darcy might leave the country, but that he should stand his ground. Yet he had avoided the Netherfield ball the very next week. She remembered also that till the Netherfield family had quitted the country, he had told his story to no one but herself, but that after their removal it had been everywhere discussed, that he had then no reserves, no scruples in sinking Mr. Darcy's character, though he had assured her that respect for the father would always prevent his exposing the son. How differently did everything now appear in which he was concerned. His attentions to Miss King. Kang. I was for some reason I was thinking of Kang the Conqueror. I don't know. His attentions to Miss King were now the consequence of views solely and hatefully mercenary, and the mediocrity of her fortune proved no longer the moderation of his wishes, but his eagerness to grasp at anything. His behavior to herself could now have had no tolerable motive. He had either been deceived with regard to her fortune, or had been gratifying his vanity by encouraging the preference which she believed she had most incautiously shown. Every lingering struggle in his favor grew fainter and fainter, and in farther justification of Mr. Darcy, she could not but allow that Mr. Bingley, when questioned by Jane, had long ago asserted his blamelessness in the affair. That proud and repulsive as were his manners, she had never, in the whole course of their acquaintance, an acquaintance which had latterly brought them much together, had given her a sort of intimacy with his ways, seen anything that betrayed him to be unprincipled or unjust, anything that spoke of him irreligious or immoral habits. That among his own connections he was esteemed and valued, that even Wickham had allowed him merit as a brother, and that she had often heard him speak so affectionately of his sister as to prove him capable of some amiable feeling. That had his actions been what Wickham represented them, so gross a violation of everything right could hardly have been concealed from the world, and that friendship between a person capable of it and such an amiable man as Mr. Bingley was incomprehensible. She grew absolutely ashamed of herself. Of neither Darcy nor Wickham could she think, without feeling that she had been blind, partial, prejudiced, absurd. They said it. They said the thing. Ha ha ha, they said it. How despicably I have acted, she cried. I who have prided myself of my discernment. They said the thing. They said it. The pride and the prejudice. The pride and the prejudices. Wow. That's them. That's them. Darcy and Elizabeth. The pride and the prejudice. I who have valued myself on my abilities, who have often disdained the generous candor of my sister, and gratified my vanity in useless or blamable distrust. How humiliating is this discovery, yet how just a humiliation. Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind. But vanity, not love, has been my folly. Pleased with the preference of one, and offended by the neglect of the other. On the very beginning of our acquaintance, I have courted prepossession and ignorance, and driven reason away where either were concerned. Till this moment I never knew myself. From herself to Jane, from Jane to Bingley, her thoughts were in a line which soon brought her recollection that Mr. Darcy's explanation there had appeared very insufficient, and she read it again. Widely different was the effect of a second perusal. How could she deny that credit to his assertions in one instance, which she had been obliged to give in the other? He declared himself to have been totally unsuspicious of her sister's attachment, and she could not help remembering what Charlotte's opinion had always been. Neither could she deny the justice of his description of Jane. She felt that Jane's feelings, though fervent, were little displayed, and that there was a constant complacency in her air and manner, not often united with great sensibility. When she came to that part of the letter in which her family were mentioned, in terms of such mortifying yet merited reproach, her sense of shame was severe. The justice of the charge struck her too forcibly for denial, and the circumstances to which he particularly alluded, as having passed at the Netherfield ball, and as confirming all his first approbation, could not have made a stronger impression on his mind than on hers. The compliment to herself and her sister was not unfelt. It soothed, but it could not console her for the contempt which had been thus self-attracted by the rest of her family. And as she considered that Jane's disappointment had in fact been the work of her nearest relations, and reflected how materially the credit of both must be hurt by such impropriety of conduct, she felt depressed beyond anything she had ever known before. Depression. Sadness. After wandering along the lane for 2 hours, giving way to every variety of thought, reconsidering events, determining probabilities, and reconciling herself as well as she could to a change so sudden and so important. Fatigue and a recollection of her long absence made her at length return home, and she entered the house with the wish of appearing cheerful as usual, and the resolution of repressing such reflections as must make her unfit for conversation. She was immediately told that the two gentlemen from Rosings had each called during her absence. Mr. Darcy for only a few minutes to take leave, but that Colonel Fitzwilliam had been sitting with them at least an hour, hoping for her return, and almost resolving to walk after her till she could be found. Elizabeth could but just affect concern at missing him. She really rejoiced at it. Colonel Fitzwilliam was no longer an object. She could think only of her letter. So, I don't want to spoil anything, but, spoil anything for 200-year-old novel. But I wonder if this is exactly the moment when Elizabeth realizes that her feelings have changed. I wonder if this is the beginning. Because yeah, the book's been out for 200 years. I wonder if this I wonder if this is the moment in which she realizes that she actually does love Darcy. And I wonder if this is the moment where things irrevocably change for her. I don't know necessarily, because she definitely has a lot of growing to do with Darcy in mind. But this is definitely the moment where things change for Elizabeth, because she realizes that her opinions of Darcy have been prejudiced, just to say the least. And she's definitely starts to think of Darcy more as an honorable man, and even though he did break up, he said the thing, he said, even though he did definitely cause Jane pain, he wasn't wrong in his opinions of her family, and that they were almost gleefully looking forward to having access to Bingley's money, particularly her mother. And it's yeah, he hurt her, but his intentions were good, and he wasn't wrong. Like he wasn't wrong in his estimation of her family. I don't know if I would actually consider this the moment when she falls in love with him, because it's a little bit weird. It would be a little bit weird of a moment to say that she falls in love with him directly at this point. But because it's a little bit too far of a swing, I think. But she definitely has a moment where where her opinion of Darcy changes. Yeah. She definitely sees him differently after she realizes the truth of what he says in the letter. But yeah, I'm so excited to finish, to keep reading and finish this novel. I don't, how much, oh wow, we actually, okay, so we're not as far as I actually thought. In my copy of sorry, hit the mic, of Frankenstein, most of the novel, most of like the pages in the copy that I had were actually just like notes and like scholarly stuff. So it's weird for me to like hold this book and like most of the book is actually the text of the book. So yeah, we have a bit of a ways to go. But yeah, it's been amazing to read this book to you, and at some point maybe I want to do like a reaction for to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Maybe I don't know if that's like that specifically is probably copyrighted, almost definitely. So we would have to maybe kill the VODs for that, maybe. But I love that series so much, and I want to do that. I want to just do it. Yeah. Sorry for my ASMR folks to yell at you in the mic. Well, thank you, Linus. My plans upcoming. Yes, I actually didn't. I wasn't at the time it was coming out. I wasn't a huge I wasn't a huge reader of Jane Austen. I knew like the general plot of Pride and Prejudice, but one of my friends in college showed me the episodes. I think they were about half finished at the time, and once I started watching it, I just binged the whole thing, and and at that point I started eagerly awaiting every single episode, and it's just amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about my plans for the next month or so, because I think I'm going to do a birthday stream in October, and it's I think that was that's a good time to do a kind of endurance stream, or maybe possibly a subathon or follow-a-thon. I don't know, like, I'm still new at this, so I don't know what like the protocol is on how long you should wait or how big you have to be to do a subathon. So I don't know. It feels very awkward to me, even though like I don't know. I'm doing this with the intention of, you know, growing and maybe making a living off it someday. But like it just feels awkward. There's no rules? Okay, cool. There's no rules. Everyone out for themselves. No. And So I figure that if we do a really long stream for my birthday stream, like, 12 hours or something, it would be really cool if we could spend some time reacting to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. And we would do games and all that stuff. I'm not gonna just react to Lizzie Bennet Diaries, even though that would take like 5 or 6 hours probably to react to everything. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking for when my birthday rolls around in mid-October, and yeah. So yeah, I think that I'm going to be finished reading for the night, because I'm getting kind of hungry and I want to make some dinner. So yeah, I had a wonderful time reading to you guys tonight. Thank you all for coming and for the great discussion about the epic fails and wins of Fitzwilliam Darcy tonight. It was a roller coaster, and he was the height of idiocy, and yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you. But yeah, I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your night, and I will find someone else for us to raid. Let's see. Who can we raid? Who needs some attention? Oh, let's try raiding Mythica, because last time Mythica tried to raid us a little bit ago, and I was ending my stream at that time. So yeah, let's raid Mythica. I will create the raid. Yeah, no problem. I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I will see you guys tomorrow, probably for more games. So yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night. Bye.